Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming so early. I have a very circuitous path to space. And as Natalia said, we want to make sure that our kids grow up with this thing we call grit now. Back then, it was lots of times it was like a hand in my development was the grit that I got back then. But I grew up down the road about an hour away, and I'll never forget when I was thinking about what am I going to be when I grow up? And many people around the moon landing, always said, do you want to be an astronaut? Because we have Neil and Buzz walking on the moon in 1969. And I said, no, I don't want to be an astronaut. I had Arthur Ashe to look up to. He trained 5 blocks down the street from where I grew up in Lynchburg, Virginia. And my dad talked about his empathy, his character, his athleticism, his intelligence. And so I wanted to be Arthur Ashe when all the other little boys wanted to be Neil and Buzz. And I think about how did I get to this blue flight suit, standing in front of you, having had the chance to float around, looking at our blue marble. It was because my parents instilled in me this belief that I could do anything I put my mind to by reading to me The Little Engine That Could. I think I can, I think I can. And the second book that was in my library of 2 books was Curious George. Curious George always looked up, always got in trouble, always did things that were sometimes not the right thing to do. But he always had someone that had his back, the man in the yellow hat. And I think about through my life and through this 1969 moment when we were doing one of the most technologically advanced things as a civilization, putting human beings on the moon. I was 5 years old in Lynchburg, Virginia, getting accosted by neighbors. I'm a Me Too. I'm a survivor. And I didn't say anything to anyone because I had friends who didn't have fathers. And I knew if I told my father, he would have killed them. And I would have been without a dad. And so that was a very early awakening in my neighborhood that everyone does not have your best interest at heart. And I held that in for the longest time until I wrote my book recently, last May. And I shared that because my dad had since passed, and I felt like I could come out with that story. Neil and Buzz walking on the moon. I'm 5 years old. I'm getting accosted. And my mother then gives me an age-inappropriate, non-OSHA certified chemistry set. And I blow up her living room. My brain is activated. It lets me know that I can be a scientist. And I meander on through school and make it to high school. And as a wide receiver on a running team, basically you don't catch many passes, you block a lot. And I had this opportunity my senior year, homecoming game, down by a touchdown. I'm running down the sideline. I'm running. The crowd is screaming. Y'all scream. I'm running. The ball is coming into my hands. My friends are standing in the stands, and they're like, Leland's going to catch the ball. We're going to win the game. And for that moment, how many of you here, by show of hands, think I caught the ball? By a show of hands, how many think I dropped the ball? By show of hands, who doesn't really care? The rest of you, right? So I'm in the end zone, the ball is coming, and I drop it. And unbeknownst to me, there was a college scout from the University of Richmond looking to see if I could play for the Spiders. I walked to the sideline, dejected. My coach, Jimmy Green, grabbed me by the face mask. He pulled me over, and he said, I believe in you. Go back out there and catch the ball. Coach, I failed. I suck. I dropped that pass in my hands in the end zone. I'm embarrassed. My family's here. My friends are here. He said, no, do it. He was my man in the yellow hat. I went back out, took the play in. The quarterback said, I'm not throwing the ball to you anymore. You dropped my touchdown pass. Running down the sideline, the crowd is screaming the second time. The ball is coming. I am so laser beam focused, I can read Spalding on the side of the ball. Caught the ball. We won the game. This scout who walked out of the stadium walked back in and saw him in the end zone, like doing a little dance. He said he failed in such a horrific way. His friends are there, his family's there. Maybe he can play for us. He recovered. That was, I think, my first thought about grit. I didn't use that word, but it was where I had failed and I had come back and I was able to do something really incredible, get a scholarship to college. I went to Richmond, studied chemistry because my mother had already showed me that I could blow things up and now I can do it legally. And went there, had a season, and got drafted to the Detroit Lions. And what every former NFL player does is they finish their master's in material science here at UVA, then they go work for NASA, right? So I went to NASA Langley. I'm working there doing fiber optic sensors, and a friend of mine says, Leland, you'd be a great astronaut. I'm like, yeah, right. Yeah, me? Yeah, right. Hands me an application. I look at it. I don't fill it out. And then this miracle happens. Another friend of mine, Charlie Camarda, he fills out the application, and he gets in. And I said to myself, if NASA's letting knuckleheads like that in to be astronauts, maybe I could be one too. So I applied the next selection, and I got in. And it was one of these moments where 2,500 people applied for 25 spots, and I was one of them. And if you look at the picture of our class, it's like, hey, where's Leland? There was a lot of diversity in that picture. Me. And so we do this training. I go to Russia, work with the cosmonauts and the first commander going to the space station. And we're doing all this incredible stuff all around the world, working with people that we used to fight against. And I come home, or come back to Houston, and now it's time for me to finish my training. And so we have this 5 million gallon pool called the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory. And you're wearing a suit that looks like a cross between the Michelin Man and the Pillsbury Doughboy. It's like this white EVA suit, extravehicular activity. And I go down in the water, and I realize at 20 feet that the little styrofoam block that costs $2 is not in my helmet. And from that point on, I hear nothing but static. The test director realizes that I can't hear anything, and they take me out of the pool. They pop my helmet off, and the lead flight surgeon on the pool deck, he walks towards me, and he's moving his lips. And I'm thinking, why is he not talking to me? Come to find out, he walks closer, he touches my right ear, and a river of blood streams down the side of my face. I am completely deaf. They rush me to the hospital. The doctors operate. They go in and they look to see if I have something called a perilimb fistula, which is your oval or circular windows are now leaking fluid out. They checked my stapes. They checked all the mechanical linkages, and everything was intact. And I think about this moment. I was at the highest point. I was about to get through this training that would have probably resulted me in being one of the first in my class to get assigned to a mission, since we were building the space station, needed spacewalkers. My friends came in and said, you should sue NASA, write the tell-all book, and get paid. And I'm like, no, my parents didn't teach me to do those kind of things. And I stayed the course, and I tried to figure out how I'm going to get through this. 3 weeks later, my hearing came back. Over the next year, they're trying to figure out what to do with me, so they said, why don't you go work in education in Washington, D.C., and see what you can do. I go there. We're kicking off this program to inspire students to nominate their teachers to become astronauts. And not for a one-way trip, but a round trip. And I'm driving from D.C. on 66, about to come down 29 to come back home to Lynchburg. And I get a phone call from my boss, who's new to NASA at the time. She says, Leland, something happened. The countdown clock for the Space Shuttle Columbia is now counting up. And I said, how far has it counted up? She said, it's 20 seconds. It's 30 seconds. And at that point, I knew all of my friends were dead. I did an illegal U-turn. I drove back to D.C. I was dispatched to David Brown, who was the mission specialist on that flight, to his parents' home in Washington, Virginia. And I showed up that night there to console them. I hug his mom. She's crying. I go to hug her dad, his dad. And he's in a wheelchair, and I hug him, and we're both crying. And he turns up and looks at me with these same blue eyes that David had, and he said, "My son is gone. There is nothing you can do to bring him back, but the biggest tragedy would be if we don't continue to fly in space to honor their legacy." And at this point, I'm medically disqualified to fly. They're not going to let me fly. They have written notes. "You are medically disqualified. You will never fly in space, Leland." And as we fly to the different memorial services around the country and the NASA jet with the families, as we descend, I clear my ears effectively. And there's a flight surgeon sitting beside me on every takeoff and landing. He calls me in his office when I'm ready to transition back from DC to Houston, and he says, "I've been watching you. I believe in you." He signed a waiver for me to fly in space. And I took that back to Houston, and they said, "You can take a picture with your family in your orange pumpkin suit when you get assigned to a flight." So I snuck my dogs into NASA to take this picture, and that picture you've seen that's gone around the internet is what happens when you break the rules. I flew in space twice, STS-122 in 2008, STS-129 in 2009. I installed this Columbus laboratory to the International Space Station, and I thought that would be my aha moment, the moment when I did my task effectively. That paled in comparison to what happened next. Peggy Whitson, the first female commander of the International Space Station, she said, "You guys bring the rehydrated vegetables, float over to the service module, and we'll have the meat." So we float over with this bag of vegetables. You can smell the meat cooking. Well, warming up in a can, but cooking. And we're floating there, breaking bread at 17,500 miles per hour, going around the planet every 90 minutes, seeing a sunrise and a sunset every 45, with people we used to fight against, all while listening to Sade, Smooth Operator. This is when I had the true epiphany, the perspective shift. You see this picture behind me. It was taken in 1968. I was 4 years old, by Bill Anders on Apollo 8. It was the first time that we had seen our planet, this blue marble, from this vantage point. This one picture fueled the environmental movement. This one picture started the Environmental Protection Agency. This one picture told us that we have this ozone layer that we're damaging because of hydrofluorocarbons. And we had done the research, and science does matter. We passed laws to fix that. And today that ozone hole is closed down. So as you go through your journey, as your kids go through their life, think about this thing called grit. I really think it's about having people that have your back and look out for you. And I have had tons of friends before my accident. After the accident, I found out who my friends really were. I only need one man or woman in the yellow hat. And as we think about perspective shift, looking back at the planet, working with people that we used to fight against, as you go over Afghanistan and Iraq from the space station, it's a beautiful, tranquil place. There's no wars, there's no fighting. And I think about how I have trained with people that are atheists, that are Christians, that are Muslim, that are a whole gamut. They eat different things than I do. And now I eat those things. And now I speak their language. And now from that vantage point, I want all of us to work together as my race, the human race. Because we're truly all in this together. And as Senator Warner said, there's fake news out there. There's all these divisive elements out there that are keeping us apart as a civilization. But if we take a look and get a perspective shift, that grit, that perseverance, and that man or woman in the yellow hat that has your back will help us change the world. Godspeed in your journey. Thank you.